Hello, this is Jim Schaefer, executive producer and host of Rip Rap, the academic book television program. My guest today is Randy Baier. Today we'll talk about books that we received for review. Welcome to Rip Rap, Randy.
I'm glad to be here. Yeah.
We'll shift a considerable amount here by talking about September 12, Community and Neighborhood Recovery at Ground Zero by Gregory Smith-Simon. Which is a pretty interesting book because, you know, we just celebrated the 10th anniversary. I don't know if celebrate is word, but observed.
Right, commemorated, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, observed.
The 10th anniversary of the horrible situation on September 11, 2001. And this has to do with recovering of the people who lived in that area, in that local community. And I'm fascinated with this because there's been a lot of material written about the people and what they had gone through. Mm-hmm. But then the question comes, well, how can we recover? Whatever it is, however big it is. But there is this question, what methods do you use?
Now, just for our listeners, can you repeat the title?
Sure. It was September 12, Community and Neighborhood Recovery at Ground Zero. Mm-hmm. And what I think is also interesting for scholars is the fact that this kind of ethnographic research can really form a solid foundation for, you know, this kind of recovery from a catastrophic disaster like that. So you got another one that I thought was interesting.
Yeah, this is on popular culture and criminology, done with the illustration of the covers is kind of clever, as if you're looking at a major sort of classic downtown movie theater. Criminology goes to the movies, crime theory, and popular culture. And indeed, this is a book about sort of what analysis of various movies based on certain themes. There are particular movies, for instance, one chapter, Let Her Go, Feminist Criminology in Thelma and Louise, the kind of iconic movie that had
two women doing Route 66.
Right, and fighting back, yes, exactly, and fighting back every, you know, sort of stereotypical male chauvinist identity figure you could think of, from their husbands who they left to these creeps along the way. Gina Davis and Susan Sarandon. But then, of course, there are social justice issues, like one of the movies that's featured is Mystic River, which talks about where the Mystic River comes into the city of Boston, and it's a real working class. You know, guess who's in it? Sean Penn plays this rebellious, working class, hard drinking, strict philosophy of life type guy. And the presence of the bridge across the Mystic River is what separates, you know, their district from the rest of, you know, from Boston and from society. It's sort of an outcast thing. And so, you know, there's a criminology aspect, a kind of a theory, a social theory of crime that movie really portrays or inspects or, you know, delves into. So it talks about, at the end of each movie at the end of each chapter are other movies that evoke similar themes. This book is written by Nicole Rafter and Michelle Brown, both of whom are research fellows in criminology. Nicole Rafter is from Northeastern University, and Michelle Brown is from University of Tennessee. And they've both worked, I guess they've worked together in institutes such as the Poynter Center for the Study of Ethics in American Institutions. And both are criminologists. And
the question I had when I thought about this book in terms of your interest in the media, I think they're arguing that you can find some valuable insights into criminology by how these movies are envisioned. And I wonder if that's truly valid, because you're coming back around
coming back around to
it seemed to me possibly even a questionable premise. You may find something out about it, but I'm not sure that, I don't know.
well, I mean, in terms of media theory, if you can put it in the passive tense, it is believed, or it is posited, that even popular media, movies which, have producers, have script writers, are intentional, have an intentional point of view, even the modern day popular media can express something that's an undertone or something that's in society and represents social mores or the times, however you want to say it. So it's kind of interesting that a movie like Thelma and Louise is tapping the zeitgeist in some way, but you might not know it at that particular moment. It might not be as intentional as you think it is. But I'm always perplexed by this, as you are, because somebody writes it that way. I mean, the script, it's not ad lib. It's a scripted work of art. It's intentional.
It would seem to me that if you had someone who had a vast experience in interpreting this kind of media work, that person might be able to filter through to find out what the value is of what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems to me what they're doing in the book is they're making a pretty aggressive claim that of the direct value of these movies toward extending criminology as a theory. And then I started getting kind of concerned about that, because it may extend your awareness, of the emotional, the imaginary dimension. But I don't know how much that extends the theory of criminology itself.
Well, movies bring us these characters who are collective representations of society, of ourselves in some ways. I mean, if you think of not so much criminology, but think of Paul Newman in HUD, or in Cool Hand Luke, or think of, Thelma and Louise might be, they're kind of acting out in ways that you might be able to say that almost, every woman in a abusive or even on a regular relationships could probably identify with the chauvinism behind what was driving Thelma and Louise, what started out as a kind of innocent, joyride to something that was, led to their own deaths. But you could probably think of all kinds of characters, iconic characters. They analyze Frankenstein in here, for instance. What does it mean to sort of be alive, and what's the criminal mind? I mean, Frankenstein, has that scene where he, the flowers and the little girl by the water and all that, and yet he's an uncontrollable. He still is a monster, but he has this pathos to him. I don't know. I mean, they tap into some deeper psyche, and so if you can explain criminal theory by what goes on in a movie or a movie situation, the artwork can express something deeper about the way society works. I think it's valid, but it's an example. It may represent all of society in one small, an hour and a half span of time, or it might just be pointing to something that's there.
I just wonder if this is sort of trying to answer the riddle of the Sphinx.
Well, what is it you're trying to answer? I mean, if you look at trying to think of an example without having literally, read chapter after chapter in here. What does the Shawshank Redemption tell you about, criminality, or about incarceration, or who's really the criminal, and can you find some kind of retribution through, paying your dues to society, so to speak.
I mean, I could agree with the idea of seeing the imaginary self, and trying to understand how things work, the process. But my concern is with my students is that they would just love to believe this, that they could watch a movie and understand, any kind of scholarly inquiry.
Is that what's behind your question?
Yeah, that
The scholarly inquiry of popular culture, or the fact that pop culture can
They're
say
making the argument-
profound things about?
well, they're making the argument that these movies are revealing new insights into criminology, and I'm just not quite ready to go all that way. There may be some insights, but the construction of the theory, I think, would depend on scholarly research, and that would not be, looking at movies. But I said my own students would love to have that convenience, so we'll just watch more movies, and then we'll learn everything there is about anything.
Well, I guess you have to have a layer of introspection when you look at what happens in a movie scenario. I mean, philosophers look at movies all the time, from science fiction movies to
Critical inquiry, that's what I'm concerned,
yeah.
is that to take some critical inquiry and take a look at it and then interpret it within that context. But I don't think there's a direct play over from, movies into criminology unless you have that critical thinking. That's just my concern about it.
Well,
I thought
you're
it was
working in the realm of art. It's not the realm of scholarship.
Yeah.
They're two different things. I mean, the way you build a montage or the way you create imagery and interplay that with sound says, and then the way people act out the roles of a particular character, that character can actually represent some kind of deeper scholarly almost kind of structure if you spin it the right way. If it's saying something about.
It just seems to me they're going pretty aggressively on this, and I'm not familiar with the criticism, and within media.
Right.
And you've given me a lot more than, but I still have that concern that, how far, it seemed to me they're pushing the limits. And that's fine for scholars to push the limits, and arguing for a certain thing, but I'm not sure that you'd find the deepest insights into a scholarly area by using a creative medium like you're saying.
Yeah.
You might find some additional things, but I mean, you take a look at something like Pulp Fiction, what is that? With Tarantino, and there's many others. So anyway, I thought it is a fascinating book in the sense that
the movies that they choose to look at I can see on many levels why they picked them. I'd really like to explore this a little bit more to see what they're coming out with related to this. I mean, they're going through major criminology theories and how these movies evoke and explain those theories in some way.
I like the idea of being creative and inventive in developing criminology.
Yeah.
Because I think up until now it's been more like forensics. It's been more the physical science and more plotting kind of.
Well, at my institution, it's mixed with anthropology and sociology. It's an interesting mix. Sociology, criminology, and anthropology.
Well, I think that's a more enlightened way of looking at it rather than just, the...
It's a social and
facts,
institutional, right. Yeah, it's less than forensics on our particular campus, but it's true. In a police science aspect of stuff, I guess that would be a different...
Because we really do need to understand the pathology. Do the Michel Foucault and take a look at what's the bad side of society and how it's functioning.
Yeah, the question is, well, the incarceration aspect of it is, why do we find incarceration as how do we view that socially as an answer to something?
Well, the penalties for misbehavior.
Yes.
First,
and what
first
is
of all, what's
misbehavior?
regarded as misbehavior?
As misbehavior in the
and then
first
what are
place.
the penalties that society assigns for that, and then how are they enforced?
Yeah, so this sort of thing brings these things out. The ironies is that in a lot of these movies, you're on the side of the criminal as the viewer. Emotionally, you're pushed to be on the side of the criminal, and you know that their actions are, well, in some cases, they're killing somebody or something like that. But on a more subtle level, their actions are generated by a whole social structure, class, race, gender, the whole litany of answers and reasons and, provocations, and that's, in a lot of ways, what it challenges you as a viewer to try to figure out. Kind of go, well, why did I just think that Thelma and Louise were totally justified in, killing this particular person or something like that?
See, if there was an inquiry where you were looking at the discourse, who wrote it, who's shaping it, and why did they do it?
Yeah.
Then you have something that would give you more meaning to it.
Well, that might be the scholarly answer. By the way, criminology goes to the movies, crime theory and popular culture.
Right,
That's
I
why
know.
we're debating this. But that's one of the things you could look into. What motivated a particular script to be written in a certain way, and what actually is the point of view.
And why would the industry pick up on that?
Yeah.
What did they see as a sellable item? What fascinates me,
At that point in time.
Yeah. that something that could be popular in this country may not be popular around the rest of the world. Something
Yeah.
that may not be popular here
Yeah.
could earn billions of dollars around the world. I mean, we've had a number of instances of that fairly recently where something that we regard as a flop in this country was just earning, all kinds of, and also stuff that may not even gotten particularly good critical review,
Yeah.
and yet people went to see it over and over again. Pulp Fiction's one of them.
Pulp Fiction. Oh yeah, right. And Pulp Fiction has received a lot of attention philosophically and socially about what it's saying about American society.
Well, here's one that I just thought was helpful. It's moving working families forward, third way policies that can work. And that's by Robert Sherry with Robert Lerman.
What is a third way policy?
I know you're going to ask me. It's an intermediate position. Third way between liberals and conservatives, combining a commitment to government expenditures that enhance the incomes of working families while recognizing that concerns for program effectiveness, individual responsibility, excuse me, and underutilization of market incentives are justified. This is of huge interest right now because just in the state there are 11,000 families cut off from welfare. They have nowhere to go. They're just nothing.
So you're not talking just about, well, I thought that partly this would also deal with the working poor. The fact that everybody's employed, or that, mom and dad, if you've got a sort of a traditional sort of family, but in many cases, grandma, single parent home, or a number of, grown children now living at home, contributing, everybody working, and yet it's hard to pull together an income that can support you.
That's exactly the point. If you have a job, you don't have a car. And then they cut back like they just did in Detroit on the bus system.
Yeah, right.
So now you can't get to work.
We're cutting the social
And the reason they have to cut
services.
The regional bus system, the smart bus system, back is because it's going bankrupt. And there's just another news item just recently that the People Movers have been shut down, which was a way for people to move around Detroit, the downtown area.
Right, just within the city.
So now there's stories that are coming up. People are taking 3-4 hours to get to work because they have to wait for the available bus. And then also in Detroit, there's 200 buses that aren't working. So the schedule says there'll be a bus every 15 minutes or half an hour.
Right.
And there may not be one for 1 or 2 hours.
Yeah, this came up last 2 weeks ago. I was listening to a Detroit station on the radio, and the issue was this very thing. The union president of the bus mechanics union was on the radio talking about this issue, and the 200 buses that weren't being fixed, and the various staff personnel who had been cut because of funding issues with the bus system. So they had cut mechanics, hence they didn't have the ability, if there was a breakdown, for them to get a replacement bus out there efficiently. And it's just a sort of a spiraling thing. But he was addressing the timetable issue, the very issue you're talking about. Because people do go out there at 5 minutes before the bus arrives. It's supposed to arrive at 10:15. You have to be at work by 11. and so on.
Well, what's interesting is that there's been such a polarization happening with the between the political parties that there isn't really a third way.
Yeah.
I mean, he's trying to
Finding
argue
the third
something
way.
that doesn't really exist. But even in arguing this position, he's also bringing up something that he contends that technological changes have created important impediments to the upward mobility of many working people. The changes made most manufacturers' goods cheaper to produce are in suburban industrial parks or abroad rather than central cities. There aren't any supermarkets.
I was in a trip to Detroit recently, and we were discussing the food aspect of living in eastern Detroit. And most people get their food from convenience grocery stores or liquor stores, not from a place. And those places have wrapped up small packages of food that comes in. It's not like a supermarket where you can get a wide variety of different vegetables and fruits and other things. It's very high-priced retail, and one of the people talking to us said that a kid had said to him, "So what gas station do you go to get your food?" And this is how, because there are either gas stations or liquor stores throughout on the corners, and fast food restaurants. But there are, whatever, the Kroger or the Farmer Jack or whatever, they've gone. They're not in the neighborhoods now.
On one hand, they say you ought to be working.
So to get to them.
Yeah. On the other hand, if you don't have the resources for food, for a place to live, for transportation, there's no way you can exist. And now, under the guise of budget cuts, they're cutting back on food stamps, cutting back on welfare.
Yes, who can get food stamps
cutting
and what
back
you can buy with them.
Enormous impact. They cut back on the No Worker Left Behind program that was retraining people who had been laid off or fired or whatever, run off the rail in terms of the auto industry. And it just seems like they're targeting working families. That's what this thing is about.
Well, yes.
How to move them forward.
It's not about, creating a more equitable welfare state. It's going the next level now.
It says married couple families constitute 39.6% of all poor households and 62.4% of all near poor households. These low-income married couple families are characterized by very low employment of wives. In poor, near poor married couple families, the share of wives who are employed is 20.6%. So, I mean, that's just shocking that, everyone talking about, well, you ought to work. You ought to work. Well, if you can't work and you don't...
Well, sure, you should work, but then your kids have to be in school. Who's going to be watching your kids when the other services can be cut as well? I mean, sometimes not working may be a more efficient or a more economical alternative to working, and there's certainly value in work. There's no doubt about that.
Well, it's turned into a really tragic situation where all kinds of things that are being benefit to the wealthy. I mean, this whole discussion about one of the Republican candidates, Kane, was talking about the 999 thing. There'd be an enormous impact on the working poor, because that'd be increasing their income tax to 9% on everything they need to have to exist. And he's starting to admit that now. He's even starting to kind of waffle on that. But just having this, what do you do if you're trying to work, and you've got a job? And he says liberals might argue they do not go far enough, these legislative initiatives, in combating the race and gender inequalities, inequities found in employment areas. They do not support the higher educational aspirations that many working class families have for their children. I have a lot of students they have trouble getting to school because of car problems,
Right.
because of family issues.
Right.
They can only afford one car. So,
Yeah.
you know, it becomes really tragic.
Right, and it's very typical of the students at both of the places where you and I work and teach, is that you're talking of students who will be commuting. They'll have maybe 2 or 3 jobs. They're trying to fit their education into a whole other daily schedule, where, you know, in the ideal, you want students to take 3 or 4 hours per credit hour, you know, each week to do their studies. They're jumping from a course. They come in, they get out of the course at 11. They have to be at work at 11:30 till 4:30 or whatever, and they're moving around. It's very, very typical of an Eastern Michigan University student, and I imagine Wayne Community College or Washtenaw Community College
the
also.
same thing. Both of these authors, by the way, have interesting backgrounds. Robert Cherry's written a book on who gets the good jobs, combating race and gender disparities, and he wrote another book, Welfare Transformed, universalizing family policies that work.
Mm-hmm.
Robert Lerman, who teaches at American University, has written books like Young Unwed Fathers, Changing Roles and Emerging Policies.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very troubling book, and I'm not sure that the third way is even possible these days. But, well, thanks for being on Rip Rap.
Oh, it's my pleasure. We got through a few this
Yeah.
time, 4 books, and plenty more
to
there.
go.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thanks for having me.
thank you. Hello, I'm Jim Schaefer, the host and executive producer of Rip Rap, the academic book television program. And what I'd like to do right now is to share with you how our unique and historic television series can use academic research to bring exciting, vital insights into important topics that affect our everyday lives. What kinds of topics? The politics and other dynamics that produce the gasoline from foreign countries for gasoline in the cars we drive. The way we care for ourselves and our family. Our sense of fashion. The ways we are attracted to other people. So we see our program as encouraging people to explore academic research because it's based on solid work. So that's a part of the Rip Rap story. We're creating history as we bring serious academic research into the public discourse.